Leadership is taking people on a journey where there's a vision, guidance and purpose.
Good leaders lead with the heart as well as the head.
Leadership means doing the right thing for the right reason, no matter how difficult it might be.
You're listening to Leadership Unwrapped, a podcast where you will hear from people who are living leadership every day.
Hi listeners, we just had a fabulous conversation with Kingsley Aikens, and it's my first time hearing from him. Patricia, I know you had met him at a conference recently and had obviously spoken so highly of him and said we just have to have him on, and you'll hear all about it, but he chats a little bit about networking and the importance of networking in all of our lives, I suppose, both professionally and personally. And I think for me one of the key takeaways is because he does say that there can be kind of negative connotations associated with the word networking. And I think what really stood out to me is thinking about it can be so enjoyable. And it's so nice to be able to connect with people and influence something positively, whatever you can do for someone.
Yeah, I do think he's right. I think sometimes we have a perception that it's a bit sleazy or a little bit smarmy, that you're networking, but you're doing it for sort of your own personal gain and nothing else. But his view of networking is completely different. It's about what you can give to other people and how you can connect to other people, but how you can call on it yourself. And he's really interesting, the piece around loneliness and having those, the importance of having connection and the impact on your health if you don't have it and if you're isolated. So, yeah, like you've said, I mean, I went to a conference that I was speaking at, and he was also one of the panel speakers, and I was just rooted to the chair. I just felt I learned so much from it, and just chatting away there this morning, same thing. My notebook is covered in all notes with little cloud things around them because they're all really important points.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's an absolute pleasure to talk to.
Oh, he is, yeah. And it's one of those episodes that I think no matter who you are, where you are, what industry you're in, what background, anything at all, I think it's something that will benefit everyone.
I agree. So I hope our listeners get something from it as much as we have. Yeah, I think it's just great.
Yeah.
We're having fun with this podcast. We're enjoying talking to all of our guests and to each other. And if you like it too, you'll find us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you follow us, our new episodes will be released and drop into your inbox immediately. So do follow and click like. If you do, it will help other people find us, which we would really appreciate.
Kingsley Aikens is an economics and politics graduate from Trinity College, Dublin. He has spent 8 years as the IDA Ireland and Enterprise Ireland representative in Sydney, and then acted as the worldwide CEO of the Ireland Funds based in Boston for 17 years before returning to Ireland and establishing the Networking Institute. Throughout his extensive career, he has come to appreciate the power of networking, and he sees it as the glue that makes everything happen. As a result, he and his colleagues have developed a unique and distinctive approach to networking through the Networking Institute, which we are very much looking forward to hearing more about today. So, Patricia, Kingsley recently, and I know you know this, listened to you speaking at a conference, and literally she came out the conference was like, Niamh, we have to speak to Kingsley. So I'm so looking forward to hearing a bit more, and I know I looked up some of your work and listened to some of your videos and things, so I can't wait to hear, especially in the career stage that I'm in, I can't wait to hear more about your insights on networking.
Terrific, looking forward to this.
Yeah, I said to you earlier, but I said to Niamh, I wish I had heard what you had to say and thought about it in the way that you think about it much earlier in my career. So, and I know you're very busy, so thank you so much for saying yes to us and giving us the time. I think people will get a lot from your experience, but also the way you think about networking. So thank you.
Len, thank you for having me.
So maybe we might start. We've given a bit of insight into your career journey to date, but do you want to let us know why perhaps networking is so important to you and why you've ended up focused in this particular area?
And look, I got to go back a little bit and say, you know, for a long time in my life, I hated networking. I mean, I thought it was a sleazy, slimy activity that people did late at night looking for a job or a sale and flicking out business cards. And I just thought it was a kind of an inauthentic way of behaving. I did not like it at all. And it took a few kind of harsh lessons and a few kind of experiences in work, etc., to get me to realize that actually no, I had it all wrong, and that I remember reading an article that said the number one predictor of career success is being in an open network rather than a closed network. And a closed network would be, if you had a party and invited everybody you knew and everybody knew each other really well. It's kind of like a closed network. But an open network is where you have a lot of diversity and difference and people from different areas. And then just through, I guess, sort of the harsh experience of life, I learned the power of networking because you mentioned, I got sent out to Australia to work out there representing Enterprise Ireland and IDA. And when I arrived, I didn't know a sinner in Australia. Now, I got to know a lot of sinners since. But I realized that, that was the first big lesson for me, was that to survive and thrive, you need to have a strong and diverse network. And from there, I began to appreciate that this stuff's important. And, and we might come to this, but it's not really taught at school or college when you think about it. I mean, progress in school or college generally is a function of a grade, a score, a metric. And then you get into the real world and there's a whole series of things that count, but they can't be counted. So I'm thinking of things like, resilience and determination and grit and attitude and humor, and you can go on and on. Yeah. All of these kind of what sometimes termed as soft skills, which is a little bit of a pity because it makes them sound a little bit squishy and unimportant. And very often soft skills are actually quite hard. So that was my background to this world of networking.
Yeah, I have felt the same about it because I find it quite hard. I'm an introvert. You mightn't believe that, but I am. And I find it quite hard to go up and speak to people and engage with people. And one of the things I've learned, and I say it to newer colleagues that I work with now, go to a conference on your own. Because if you go with your peers, you'll hang out with your peers. But if you go on your own at coffee break, you'll end up connecting with people. And that's networking too, and introducing yourself and making those connections that stay with you for your career. But it's not a skill we learned, and it's certainly not a skill that I learned it through my PhD or my master's. It was something that I had to develop myself. And I think we could help people a bit better by supporting people in developing those skills.
And actually just picking up on something you just said, and introverts can actually be better at networking than extroverts. And that seems on the surface to be hard to understand because we tend to mix up networking and sociability. We tend to think that the most social person is by definition the best networker, but actually introverts can be better because they do it with decency and authenticity, integrity. They ask questions and they listen. All the things that the extrovert doesn't really do. I mean, the extrovert's trying to wow you, trying to impress you, is looking over your shoulder to find somebody more interesting to talk to. So I'm not an introvert, but I'm also not an extrovert. I'm what they class as an ambivert, which is, I really enjoy social activities and all that kind of stuff, but I really, really need time on my own. So I've kind of got a bit of both. But I think it comes as a surprise to many people when I say, actually, introverts can be really good at networking.
Yeah. You made my day there now, I must say. You can keep talking about that. I'm very happy. So,
but I think it's something that can come with a little bit of pressure as well, because there's more and more conversations around networking at the moment. And I'm just thinking of, like, when I went to a conference, I know I was talking to another PhD student, and it was like their one big conference that they'd get to go to as part of their journey, due to funding and that type of thing. So they'd put all their eggs in one basket, as it were, and their supervisor had said to them, like, okay, this is make or break here. Like, you really need to come home with, kind of X number of contacts almost. And like immediately she started to worry about that, because of the pressure that came with the expectation of networking when you go to the event. So it's I think it's difficult having expectations around it without, as you say, any kind of training or guidance on it.
I agree, and I think the point you made earlier about not going to a conference with a buddy that you hang around with all the time. And you even see it at these, like Chamber of Commerce dinners and things. A company will go and they'll have 10 people on their company table and they'll spend the entire night talking to themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's right. And a little bit of this is pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and into what I call a growth zone. And when you look at it like that, I think you can sort of see the positives. But I completely understand. I mean, one of the great fears in life is walking into a room where you know nobody. I mean, I don't like that. Nobody really likes that. So you do have to kind of push yourself outside that kind of comfort zone. I also say your name tag is a permission device to talk to strangers. You know?
Yeah. Love it.
And it's just and I think when you think about it, talking to strangers is what networking, a lot of networking is all about. And what are you told? What are you told as a young kid by your parents? They say don't talk to strangers, right? And yet, our children are at more risk statistically from friends and family than they are from strangers. And yet we have this, what I call stranger danger. Don't talk to strangers. There's something odd or about them, and it's risky, But actually the stats don't bear that out.
Yeah. And I agree. And you also describe networking, which I heard you say, as building long-term hearts and minds sustainable relationships. I think that's a fantastic way of thinking about networking, and it makes it, like you've said, more authentic rather than that sort of perception that it's less authentic to be just connecting for the sake of connecting.
Yeah, and back to your very original question as to why I kind of got into this and realised it was important, is I had a few kind of what I call light bulb moments in my career. The first one was that, life is a game of inches. The difference between success and failure, coming first and second, it can be tiny, can be minuscule, can be very, very wafer thin. And we see it in sport all the time. You can win a golf tournament after 4 days by one stroke, or one goal in a match or something. Yeah. So it's often very, very narrow, but it's actually, the implications can be enormous. And so being, the whole theory of kind of marginal gains is that, if you're just 1% better, you don't get 1% more. You often get a lot more. And if you're 1% worse, you don't get 1% less. You often kind of get nothing. So back to my old IDA days, when we were trying to get a foreign direct investment into Ireland, if we won an FDI decision, fantastic. If we came second, even if it was by a tiny margin, guess what we got? We got nothing. So it is, it's quite, the implications can be significant. So I realized that. And then the other real thing I realized that, one introduction, one conversation can change your life. But they don't happen lying in bed or sitting at your desk. They happen when you're out and about, when you're in motion, when you put your talents on display, when you get an opportunity to speak, when you change your routines, when what happens then is you're inviting a lovely concept, I call it funnels of serendipity. You're inviting chance and randomness into your life. And guess what, when we look back in our lives, we've all got examples of just why we ended up doing something or why we spent time with somebody. It goes right back to luck and chance and randomness and serendipity. Yeah. I think planning gets you to the tip of the iceberg, but serendipity, luck and chance gets you to the 7/8 of the iceberg that's hidden underwater.
Yeah. And you also say that opportunities don't float around on clouds, but they're actually attached to people. And I think that's just a stroke of genius. You're absolutely right.
That's right. I mean, look, you can't go it alone in life. I mean, as I said, that opportunities don't float around in clouds. They're attached to people. So if you're looking for an opportunity, you're really looking for a person. But yet we get peddled this kind of myth of individualism. It's kind of really like a Hollywood myth, the Lone Ranger, the Marlboro Man, the Wonder Woman. Life is about the rugged individual taking on the world and winning. And we love that. It's a heroic film sort of stuff. But actually, it's bullshit. Life is about connecting, collaborating, cooperating. It's about connecting with other people. And even though, networking is it can be very helpful for very practical things in your life, and certainly in your business life and in your professional academic life. It's a way to find investors and find get sales and find staff and all that good stuff. But the reason I'm particularly interested in it is that all the research shows that people who have strong and diverse networks live longer, are stronger mentally and physically, earn more money, and are happier. And I kind of like all of those. And there's another one which I think is possibly more important and more relevant today than ever. Networking is the antidote to loneliness, which I just think is such a critical thing in the world today. I mean, so many people now live alone. In cities like Paris and Stockholm, it's over 60%. Wow. So, and the Harvard longitudinal study on aging, which is the longest study ever done in history. It basically says that isolation and loneliness are more damaging to your health than smoking, obesity, alcohol.
Yeah.
So it puts it right up there. And this has all been reinforced and re-emphasized by the last few years that we've all gone through with COVID. Because I think the hidden cost of COVID is that our networks have shrunk. We've hunkered down with friends, family, and just a few connections outside of that, the inner concentric ring of our network. But that's not where opportunity lies. Opportunity lies at the outer concentric ring of your network. So the net cost of this is that, our networks have shrunk. There's less learning on the job. There's less company loyalty. That's an interesting one. And there's, I think, a bigger struggle with developing company culture. And as we discussed before the recording, less sense of belonging, which I think is a really powerful dynamic out there. So we are paying a price, and I think we're going to see that price being paid in mental health issues, etc., as the years go by. So we really have to kind of refresh and renew relationships and build new ones.
Yeah, because COVID was the exact opposite, wasn't it? Like, it was, your bubble, like, was how we were referring to, that you should be in your bubble, and it's the exact opposite of putting yourself out there and out of your comfort zone. And at the same time, there was 2 years where that was quite strong, and I know COVID's still around and all that, but, there was 2 years where people really were very consciously trying to minimise their contacts, and that's a long time to be reframing your mind after, to get back out there and start meeting people again.
Completely. I mean, and I think the other danger in all of this is that when you hunker down, you tend to spend a lot of time with people just like you. Your friends and family are kind of like you. So there's a fancy Greek word called homophily, which kind of means the tendency we all have to hang around with people just like us. But we're living in societies which are actually very, very diverse. So when I grew up in this great city of Dublin, which was neither today nor yesterday, I hasten to add, we used to describe it as male, pale and stale. It was not very cosmopolitan, not very international. I told a joke when I was down in Limerick. I said, I remember back then I went into a restaurant. I asked the waiter, what's the soup du jour? He said, hang on, I'll ask the chef. So he goes in and he asks the chef, and he comes out and he says, it's soup of the day, right?
I know, remember. Very good.
And but now the city I'm living in here, you just think of the statistics that 14% of the United States were not born in the United States. In Ireland, it's 17%. In Dublin, it's 25%, So what we're living in is a very diverse, cosmopolitan society. But here's the question. If your network does not reflect the diversity of the society you live in, the economy you operate in, you as an individual, you as a company underperform. That's backed up by tons of research. So there's an interesting challenge there of having to be making a decision to seek out what I call unlike-minded people who aren't like you, don't look like you, dress like you, sound like you, have the same views, opinions, etc. And that's something we all have to be aware of, because otherwise we'll end up in these kind of, echo chambers of people who just reinforce our own beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think we're hearing so much about the importance of diversity, but we need to live it, and we need to even just to scan your network to see how. The challenge from what you say, which is really important for us, is to scan our network and to see, is it reflective of the society in which we're now working. And in our line of work, international engagement is huge, but it's about reflecting the diversity in that international engagement as well, not just going to the Eurocentric piece all the time. It's really challenging for us.
Yeah, no, I think we all have to sort of make a deliberate, analysis of our networks. Part of our teaching process in the Networking Institute is to encourage people to do an audit of their network, which means to actually, print off your network on a wet Tuesday and really look at it. And what you discover is, you discover a few things when you do that. One is you can tidy up your network. I have takeaway stores in Boston or Sydney. I don't need them anymore. Get rid of that. We sometimes say prune your network and watch it grow. So that's quite a good exercise to do. Secondly, you'll realize when you look at your network, there's whole areas where you know nobody. You just don't know anybody in, I don't know, aircraft leasing or tourism or reinsurance or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you can actually say, I'm going to go and seek out people in those areas because I want to learn about those areas. So that's a proactive decision you can make. And then the third thing, and it's a really interesting one, is you'll discover that you had some terrific networks in the past, some terrific connections in the past, and you've just let them slip. You just lost contact. And nothing happened. You didn't have a row or dispute, but just, life got in the way. You went one way, they went the other way. And I always say, they're the hidden gems in your network. And I did it in a very practical, when COVID struck and we couldn't move, etc., I actually just dug into my network and it was just one call a week, but I did it for over 100 weeks, one call a week to somebody that I used to know really well in the past and I just hadn't spoken to, maybe 5 or 10 years. And what's lovely about that is you can pick up where you left off. You're not looking for anything. You're not trying to make a sale or anything. You're just ringing up to say, hi, we're all hunkered down here. We'd love to, how are you going? How are the kids? So that was a fabulous experience I went through, and we can all do that. So I think there's a little bit of process you can hang around networking rather than just think it's sort of something that just kind of happens on its own.
Yeah. I think that's really a useful tip for people to think about, is to just connect, like one a week, which is really interesting. A coach had given me that advice about sending a message once a week to your team, to somebody in your team. And it generates an energy just by doing that alone. It says, I see you and I remember you. It's just really simple, but really valuable. People respond really well to it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we sometimes say, that kind of approach is like picking up grains of sand, one at a time. And it feels like an absolutely impossible task. But actually, in time they become bucketfuls, and you'd be pleasantly surprised what comes out of it. And it I think there's a huge sort of nearly like a dopamine hit on both sides, that somebody cared enough to give you a call to say how you going, what's happening in your life, and you yourself get to have, and you just always be amazed what comes out of it, because the way to people you don't know is through people you do know, and that suddenly becomes like the Tupperware effect, you start. I sometimes say it's the ripple effect, you throw a stone into a pond, those ripples kind of spread and spread and spread.
Yeah.
And it becomes a very, I think we're human animals. We crave social contact. We enjoy it. We get a great hit when we introduce two other people to each other that don't know each other. I mean, that's a lovely thing to do. And something good comes out of that. We all feel great about it.
Yeah. But the thing about this as well, though, is you have to go and put yourself out. You need to put yourself in the space or in the way of making networks. So you have to go to the things like, the conference here or the workshop there or the evening meeting or the dinner or the social occasion, the chamber occasion in the city or whatever is happening. You need to go to them to make those connections. You have to put the effort in.
And networking is easy to do, but it's easy not to do. And so it's easy to say no to all those things and just say, I'm tired, I've had a long day, I'm cranky, the kids or whatever, and just say, look, I'm just not going to make the effort. And I completely understand that. And we have to keep all of this sort of stuff in balance. But the harsh reality is that if you don't take action, quick as a flash, nothing happens. You know what I mean? So you have to do stuff. So it is about being proactive and taking action. And I always say, go the extra mile. There's less traffic there. Yeah. Just push yourself a little bit more. Go 51% of the way rather than 49% of the way. And guess what? You get pleasantly surprised by what comes out of it.
Yeah, that's it. And it's such a universal thing as well, isn't it? I mean, I saw a clip there just this morning of President Biden's visit, and it was the Taoiseach's dinner that was happening last night, and they were talking like it was a voiceover, and everyone was coming in and shaking hands and sitting down at their seats for the meal or whatever, and the voiceover is talking about, and this is still work, they're all networking and making the connections, whatever, and you could see these really like high profile people working the room, and it was just really interesting in like when I knew I was coming into this conversation, I was just thinking about just how universal it is.
Absolutely. And, I think also we nearly have an unfair national advantage here because partly because of my other great interest in life is diaspora. And, 10 million people left Ireland in history, which is the bad news. And the good news is that 10 million people left Ireland in history because it means we now have a global tribe which very few countries in the world can kind of equal. But it's a sociable tribe who enjoy networking. I gave some examples on an interview yesterday. I mean, there's 7,000 Irish pubs outside of Ireland, more outside of Ireland than inside of Ireland. That's, 6 million people in England have an Irish grandmother, or grandfather, grandparent, which means there's more English people with an Irish grandparent than Irish people with an Irish grandparent because of the numbers. That, there was a time in history when the Prime Minister of New Zealand was called Muldoon, the Prime Minister of Australia was called Keating, the Prime Minister of England was Callaghan of Britain, the Prime Minister of Canada was Mulroney, the President of the United States was Reagan, and Charles de Gaulle in France traced his origins back to the McCartans in County Down. So
there you go.
So what you saw over the last few days with Biden and all is just it's the tip of the spear of something quite incredible around the world, which is the network that Ireland has all around the world. And there's all these organisations and associations, like there's 500 GAA clubs outside Ireland. There's the same number of Kildas Kiltory groups outside of Ireland. So it is a phenomenal national resource we have. And what were once, I say, lost actors are actually now national assets. And so that's an exciting dimension. Because I think there's a difference between, and don't let me rant on too much about this, but I think there's a difference between the state and the nation, the state being kind of lines on a map, but the nation is kind of like a global notion. And boy, do we have a massive global footprint.
I love that. Yeah,
It's
I love
huge.
the idea of,
It's huge. I was talking to a friend. They were thinking about moving away for the summer, and they just were kind of, to and froing about whether they wanted to go over to America, and they were like just saying that, basically it's a little bit scary, when you have to move away and you have to start from scratch when you don't know anyone or whatever. And the conversation initially went to, well, sure, join the GAA team, like. That was actually how the conversation went. It was like, sure, suppose I should meet loads of people or whatever, and I know so many people who have moved away, and that's the first thing that they would do, because it brings you into that community where you can, feel, again, it goes back to belonging, I suppose, as well a bit, doesn't it? But I completely agree with you, but we have such a strong network to draw from alone without even having met people. There's almost a network because of where we're from,
Sure. And when I was with the IDA and Enterprise Ireland, I used to call these people that I know in the Irish network, I call them tipping agents, people who could nudge a deal in our direction through an introduction, a piece of advice, a conversation, a suggestion, etc. And I found these tipping agents were phenomenal. They were in positions of some influence and affluence at times, and they could open a door. And that becomes the marginal gain. That becomes the nudge factor. It becomes the difference that can actually pull something in Ireland's direction. So I think we're very fortunate to having that kind of global resource that we can tap into.
Yeah. And the other piece around networking, the way that I've heard you talk about networking that I have liked, which links into those kind of almost that space internationally and that global nation. It's not about what you can get for yourself. It's also about what you give to other people. And you've talked about, opening the door for someone or getting two people connected that need to, that it will help both of them. That there's a buzz from doing that too. It's not just about, furthering yourself.
Yeah, in fact, I think when you even look back on the definition of networking, most people think networking is something you do when you're looking for a job or a sale, whereas we take the opposite view. We actually think networking is what can you do to help other people, what can you do to add value to other people, based on a really sort of very simple and very human principle. The more you give to individuals on a consistent basis, the more it comes back to you from the network. And it's a virtuous circle. You feel good about what you're doing, and the other person benefits. And guess what? Without looking for anything or hollering anything. And I always say, networking is not about any one big thing. It's about lots and lots of small things. And I think when I was down in Limerick, I gave the example of, I write handwritten notes. I have a card, I have a pen, I have ink, I have stamps, I have a postbox. And I write cards to people, thanking them for anything, or maybe I send an article, sometimes even get a book and send it to people, because nobody does that handwritten stuff. It sounds like Charles Dickens at work. But when you do send a handwritten note, that's making a real statement. I remember reading a line that says, what comes from the hand goes to the heart. And it's a simple thing, And I've dozens and dozens of these small little simple things. I'll give you a couple more. One is never leave thank you naked. In other words, don't say to somebody thank you, because that's such a throwaway line. But if you say thank you for inviting me to your podcast, thank you for introducing me, thank you for something, small little thing makes a difference. And the final one, always try to remember something small about people, some small bit of information. It might be about their family or their kids or the exams the kids are doing, or where you go on holidays, your favourite food or a football team or whatever it is. And when you repeat that back to them, maybe months or years later, boy, are they impressed, because it proved you did the number one thing about networking, you listened. In a world where most people just don't listen. I mean, we live in a world where people are very poor listeners. So when you do that stuff, and all those little things, I think they all add up.
It's really important when you do remember something and you say it to the person, or you say, how is such, after they've, 2 weeks before, or a month before, or a couple of months before said something. It's happened to me where I felt, oh my God, they really connected with that, and it's made me feel more connected to them. There's a reciprocity in it, which is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. A small thing, but big implications.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about mentoring and sponsorship, Kingsley? Because when you talked about this, I was rooted to the chair. We've taught this area, but I hadn't thought much about sponsorship, and yet the way that you spoke about it made perfect sense to me when I reflected on my own career. I thought, you know what, this has happened for me. So I thought listeners would get a lot from hearing a little bit about that. Would that be okay?
Sure, super. Yeah, I think in your career you need to look out for different types of people who kind of help you in your career and in terms of your network. And you need to have three types of network. You need to have a personal network, and that's all your friends and buddies and mates and pals in school and church or whatever it is. And that's all great, because they're all in different diverse industries and sectors, and they can make interesting introductions for you. So we all need a personal network, and we all have that. But we also need to have a practical network. And a practical network is the people who will help you do your job efficiently and effectively. You need to have a courteous and harmonious relationship with these people. You don't have to love them or spend a lot of time with them or go on holidays with them or anything. They help you do an efficient and practical kind of job. So that's a practical kind of network. And then you need a kind of a strategic network. And the strategic network, they're the sorts of people who are going to help you get to where you want to be in the next 5 years. And in that, we talk a bit about mentors and we talk a bit about sponsors. So the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor doesn't have to be in your organization. It could be somebody outside. And a mentor talks to you. A mentor kind of gives you the good, the bad, and the ugly, gives you lots of advice. That's terrific. But a sponsor who needs to be in your organization, a sponsor just doesn't talk to you. A sponsor talks about you. And the reason is that every major decision about you, your career, your compensation, your promotion, the next job you take, will be taken by a group of people sitting around a table in a room, and you won't be in that room. So if nobody knows you, if nobody speaks up when your name is mentioned, guess what? They'll move right along to the next name. So now you've got this challenge of you need to find somebody who'd be willing to kind of go out on a limb for you, who's willing to kind of, as we say, sponsor you, to talk you up and when you're not around. So a lot of people miss that bit. I think a lot of people slip into this notion of, we call it the good worker syndrome. In other words, they say, you know what, I'm going to work really hard, love this job, going to work really hard. I'm going to do a super job, keep my head down and let my work speak for itself. But here's the problem. Work doesn't speak. Other people speak. And if other people don't know how you're contributing to the success of the organization, guess what? You just get ignored, no matter how good the work you do. So it's important that, of course, that you do, invisible work, you beaver away and do your work, but you also need to do visible work. People need to know how you contribute to the success of an organization. So I came across this in a practical sense during my own career. And then I saw it beautifully articulated by a guy called Harvey Coleman. And he had a theory about career progress, and he said, and networking, and he said it's the PIE theory, P-I-E. And P stands for performance. And he said an outrageous thing. He said how well you do your job contributes 10% to your career progress. Now, surely that's nuts. Surely doing a super job is like, it's 80%. It must be 80, 90%. Do a great job when you will soar. And he says, no. He says, doing a great job is the minimum. It's mandatory. It's expected of you. It's expected of everybody. It gets you into the stadium of competition. It gets you on the pitch. It gets you, as he said, on the career ladder. It doesn't get you up the career ladder, because he said you get paid on performance. You get promoted on what other people think of your potential. Now he's introducing two pesky little words, other people. So if it's not P for this pi theory, which is only 10%. What is the I and the E? Well, the I, he says, is your image. And he says that's 30% of career progress. And that's, what's your reputation? Your reputation is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. And your reputation follows you around. And in some cases, your reputation precedes you. People have heard of you before they've even met you. So he says that's 30%. And then 60% of career progress, he says, is E, which stands for exposure. Who's seen you in action? Who's seen you deliver? What would you be a go-to person for? What are you known for? He said, you got to be known, he said, known, not famous, not be a Kardashian, but you got to be known for something. You got to be a go-to person for something. When your name is mentioned, what are the adjectives and nouns that come into people's heads, You're the person to go to for something. So this all kind of segues into this whole notion of, your personal brand. And I'm always a little nervous about talking about personal brand, because I think it makes you sound like a tin of beans or something. But the reality is, whether we like it or not, we all have a personal brand. Yeah. And your personal brand is not what you say it is. It's what other people say it is. And, not having a personal brand, some people say, I don't have a personal brand, is having a personal brand. So, these are the sorts of soft things that people don't often get taught very much about, don't get an opportunity to kind of articulate or discuss it, but they're important.
Yeah, I think this is huge. And I think we haven't talked enough about that in terms of career development for men and for women. But I've noticed in my role now that when an opportunity would come for someone, and it would put them out into a wider domain, or put them on the, in the radar across the university, or maybe across universities. And you'd say that's an opportunity that you have to take, because that gives you exposure. But people will say, look, I'm really busy at the moment, and this is, and you'll do as much coaching as you can to encourage them to think more widely. And some get there, but some don't. And I always feel a little pang of sadness when somebody doesn't take it up, because I know that that exposure piece means that when you're in, when that conversation is happening in that room that you're not in, that person has become known for being really good in this area across a range of people. So they latch on to that. And so you have to take the opportunities when they come, and it's not about being expedient about exposure, saying I'll do something, but go on a committee and do nothing. It's being part of it and making a contribution that people latch onto and say, this person is really, reliable, or their potential is huge, or I've seen their capacity, and that exposure is more than from within your own unit in your organisation. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I think I'm always sensitive about this topic, because it sound as if I'm promoting people to be really pushy, smarmy, pushing themselves, boasting, all that kind of stuff. And there's a fine line between that and just making sure that people know what you contribute to the organisation. And in a sense, it is about your personal reputation, and it's also about something else, which is developing trust from other people in you as a person. And trust is a pretty fascinating thing. I mean, there's a thing called the Edelman Global Trust Survey, comes out every year. They look at trust around the world, and they said that trust in 4 institutions, is the most recent report, government, media, non-profit and business, is at its lowest level in recorded history. So we're living in very distrustful times. We distrust a lot of the things we used to trust in the old days, government or church or whatever. So building a reputation for trust, and trust is not an event. You don't meet somebody today and they trust you tomorrow. And trust is not even deserved. Trust is earned, and trust is doing what you say you're going to do over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And we all know it. We kind of find it hard to describe it, but we know it when we see it. And building that reputation for trust, I think, is probably the most important element of your personal brand, is having a reputation for being trustworthy.
Yeah. I don't think it's even effective to, you know, when you're saying that you're not necessarily advocating for people to really push themselves out there and kind of be, you know, like really
Smarmy,
forward and, you know, about it and things like that. Smarmy, yeah. But like, I think I don't think you can do that and get the results that we're talking about here. You know, I know I was speaking to someone at one of these events, and you know, she was really experienced academic, so she'd been at loads of them, and we were kind of having a similar conversation. And she was like, you know how people are from how you speak to them, how they present themselves, how generous they are with, you know, their knowledge or their network or whatever it is, or if they're just trying to get something off of you, and that's the purpose of them having walked up to you. So I think you can see it very clearly.
Yeah.
You know,
It
doesn't
your
work.
radar is there. Your radar can pick up these things for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think we should listen very carefully to that radar. That, you know, I look back on my own career and I say, I've had a few instincts that I didn't listen to. And boy, I wish I did. Do you know, my life got more complicated because I didn't. And I've learned to trust that piece as well in when you're networking with colleagues, that sense of that you trust the instinct that you're getting. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
And I think I think a really important part of networking, if I was asked the number one skill in networking, would be to be a really good listener. And you know, we live in a world where, you know, people just don't listen. A lot of people are narcissistic listeners. So if I said to you, Niamh, I'm thinking of buying a motor car, and you said, I bought one last week, the guy wanted 20,000, I got him down to 10,000, supercar. You've taken my topic, my point, and hijacked it and turned it into yours. And people do that all the time. And you know, so a lot of people, there's a difference between hearing and listening, you know, and a lot of people hear, but they don't really listen. And most people, when you're speaking to them, are quiet only because they're preparing what they want to say next, not to hear what you're actually saying and not to really listen to what you're saying. So I think that that's a really interesting skill to have, to see listening as a form of activity, you know, listening not just to what somebody says, but what they're going to say next, you know, and starting sentences that begin with who, what, when, where, why, and how, and end with a question mark. You're just asking questions and, you know, giving somebody, being completely present in their presence, you know, really listening to specifically what they're saying, asking the right kind of follow-up questions. Oh, that's really important. And I think in networking, there's actually probably three great questions you can ask in any encounter with anybody. And the first one is, what can I do for you? Rather, what can you do for me? Because, you know, I think that gets that whole notion of I'm willing to do and give something to you. And then the second question would be, if you were me, what would you do? And here you're asking for advice, which is, you know, paying respect and deference to somebody's wisdom and experience, etc. But you have to practice what I just talked about. You have to practice kind of listening. And both those questions kind of segue into what I think is really the gold dust question about networking, which is who do you know who works in aircraft leasing or lives in Cork, or whatever the answer is. So what you're kind of really saying is, do you trust me enough that you'd be willing to put your name and reputation on the line for me to make an introduction? And having an introduction, it's a bit like, you know, having a passport at the border. You know, it just makes all the difference if you have somebody willing to make that kind of introduction. And that's where networks become very, very powerful. People see you as somebody that they'd be happy to make an introduction for. And they see you as somebody that they don't think they're trying to use you in some way. They actually are very happy to add value. And you know, if you just pass that stuff on, I'm a great believer in send the elevator back down, you know. I've had a lot of help from a lot of people in my career over the years, and I just want to pass it on to as many people as possible. The people that help me are either they're not around or I can't, I've lost touch with them, but I can pass it on to others. And so that kind of ripple in the pond effect, that kind of can be very powerful.
Yeah, I love that idea of send the elevator back down. We talk about this a good bit. about how you pay it forward or how you generate a network, of support, of kindness, basically. So, and I mean, networking is about kindness. It's about connection, but it's also about kindness, which I really value.
I take the ATM approach to networking. Like if you go to an ATM machine and you keep taking that money out, guess what happens? There's a flashing sign comes up saying insufficient funds, right? You must know that sign. Unless you put money back in. And if you put money back in, everything's fine. So that's where it's networking is reciprocal, but very different skills. It's percussion or drums or wind or string or whatever it is. And they're all different. But the whole is more than the sum of the parts, if you know what I mean. And you need a network that has all these brilliant people in different areas. And when they come together with you as the conductor of this orchestra, it becomes something really, really, really powerful. And so I do think, you need to think of your network as it's a safety net. If things go wrong or you have a crisis or you lose a job or something, it's a safety net. But it's also a trampoline that can bounce you into all sorts of different types of places and different types of people, and you can use it in both those positive sort of ways.
If you were, sometimes I think in schools and in teaching, we see ourselves as networking only within our own area. So, if you were to say, how could a school leader build a network that would be more sustaining? We see a lot of burnout and stress and overworking in that particular population. It's really difficult role. There's a new report out in the UK that shows the hours that school leaders are working is inordinate. So even getting the time is a challenge. But I'm just wondering, in my head, how would we support them to see networking differently? Listening to this obviously would be the first step. But
yeah, but seeking out difference, and I know the last thing they want is more chores piled on them, because they're so busy, they're under such pressure and stress in many ways. But it is important that they kind of can poke their head above the parapet and see outside the somewhat siloed world that we all tend to end up in. So having that opportunity of looking outside of it, I think when we're growing up, we tend to have two types of networks, or we tend to have an organic network, which kind of just happens as a function of school and family and hobbies and sports and all that kind of activities, and that's fine. And that's great, and that we hang around with people kind of just like us. That's all fine. But as you progress through your career, you have to actually have to develop a network which is intentional and which is strategic and which is thoughtful. And so a lot of people in their career don't realize that the technical skills they needed to get their job in the first instance, critically important as they are, become less important because everybody has them. You can't compete on what everybody has, and relationships become more important. So they miss that kind of inflection point, and they often get a little bitter and unhappy. Sheryl Sandberg, I think she calls it the tiara effect. And this particularly, she was saying about women in business, where they say that, I'm going to do a super job and I will soar automatically, and then they see somebody else who is making great progress but is not as good as them, they think, and they get kind of upset about that. So, those relationship things are important. So, to answer your kind of question about the burnout and the pressure on these people, if they still got to find a way to seek out people who are not teachers, who are in different industries and different things, and begin to share that stuff. And that's why, chambers of commerce and those sorts of institutions are important, because you can have a certain sharing of issues, and yet you're meeting people in different sectors. When I worked with the Ireland Funds, I was amazed. In New York, we'd have a board of maybe 30 people in New York, and they were all from different sectors. There's accountants, there's lawyers, there's advertising people, there's aircraft leasing people. And actually, I didn't realize it when I got going in this, but we served as a really interesting way for them to meet leaders in other areas, because they're so busy in their world. They get little time to do that. But by being part of a non-profit, and the glue being, in our case, Issues in Ireland, allowed them to meet people of diverse backgrounds and industries. And guess what? they started doing business with each other. So there's a bit of self-interest in there. I mean, I think Bill Gates put it well some time ago. He said the great drivers of life are self-interest and helping others, which at one level sounds contradictory, but I get what he's saying, you know.
Yeah, I do too. And I do think there is a lot to be learned from looking at how or just talking to people who lead in other areas. So in industries or different industries and tertiary sectors and all of that kind of, but that intersection generates something else or gets you to think a little bit differently about the way that you're doing your own work. Or even, about how you could do it differently or help yourself better in the process, that you're just simply by having a quick conversation with somebody at a Chamber of Commerce evening can change how you operate your meetings. It just...
Exactly. And, I often think back to my dad left school at 14, joined a company and left that company age 77. Just a quick 63 years in one company.
Wow.
Right? So in those days, companies outlived people. But now we're in a world where people outlive companies. I mean, 50% of the people listening to this call who reach the age of 60 will reach the age of 90. Many people will spend a third of their life post-work in retirement in many cases. So there are real implications in all of that. But when I look at my kids now joining companies and getting going on their careers, they're not going to being that like my dad, who was 63 years and got a clock at the end of it. That's not going to be the world they live in. Their world is going to be extremely diverse, and they're going to have maybe 15 or 20 different jobs in different companies. And that's why your network becomes really, really important. Because like 80% of good jobs are not even advertised. They come through your network. And so there's a sort of a very practical reason why you should, early in your career, be building that diversity into your network, because we're living in, you don't need to tell you guys, an extraordinary kind of disruptive change. Turbulence and disruption are kind of the norm. And, COVID was such a devastating impact. And often people think back to the last great scourge, which was back in the early part of the century when we had that awful flu epidemic around the world that killed millions and millions and millions of people. But people sometimes forget that was followed by an extraordinary period of growth and innovation and creativity and invention. I mean, we went from horses to motor cars in a very short period of time. Fifth Avenue was full of horses in 1900, and in 1914 there wasn't a single horse to be seen. And that was after centuries. So I'm looking at ChatGPT, and I'm sure in the educational world, you're all watching all that. But that sort of turbulence and disruption is going to be the norm. So we got to build in a degree of resilience into people in terms of what their careers are. And I think part of that resilience is helping them build a diverse range of connections and contacts that they can engage with.
Yeah, that's it, because I think there's another huge element of it that I don't know, have we necessarily explicitly touched on it yet, but of course by building networks you can get opportunities and jobs and those types of things. But there is just for example, I was just thinking when you asked about school leaders, Patricia, building a sense of community of people that you can talk to and people that you can say, how are you, I'm having this general issue, have you experienced something like that before, and try and learn from other people, and just having that sense of community where people feel that they're not alone in whatever it is that they're dealing with. And that's a huge part of having a network as well.
Yeah, I'm really interested. The demographic of our leadership in school leadership now, I'm talking about specifically, is changing so much. And there's the piece around just being able to bounce off ideas and get ideas, But the other piece is we've a real unusual anomaly in Ireland where our school leaders, as they're finishing their careers, begin PhDs. And when I go to Europe, they're like, what? Why are people doing it at that stage? I think because they have more to give, and they're looking for ways to increase their own knowledge, but also to share it in ways. So the networking is also about that piece, and that's connected to what you've just said, Niamh. And that's why, if we can help change the mindset around networking, that will support that piece of work that school leaders are doing, and looking at how they can then give back, because they're not finished when they're retiring. Or retiring early. They have a
Look,
lot
I
more to
agree with-
give.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In fact, some years ago, a friend and I set up, a friend Ed Kelly set up an organisation called The Third Act, basically saying that, listen, people leaving, careers in their, late 50s, early 60s, they actually may have 30 more years to go, and they have a huge amount of energy, enthusiasm, knowledge, expertise, and we fail in a way to kind of tap into that and find a way, because I think the most important driver at that stage in life is often purpose. And when you pull the career rug out from under people, they often feel a lack of purpose. I know when I lived in the US, we used to run events down in Florida, and that's where Americans, when they make a ton of money in Chicago or somewhere, they go and live down in Florida. But very often they kind of dribble away because they just don't have any great sense of purpose in their life anymore. So I think purpose is important. And I think you touched on something there, which is the problem with there is a real problem with the word networking. First of all, most people kind of hate it, and it conjures up, as I said at the beginning, pretty sleazy images. And it is a problem with the word. I mean, there's a difference, interestingly, between the noun and the verb. Like, if you say I have a good network, that sounds pretty positive. That's good.
Strong.
But if you say, networking, people cringe and think that's something a little bit dirty. So I think there's an issue with the word. And I've struggled with it ourselves here in the Institute, because people were saying, no, change, you should be called the connecting or whatever it is. But, we all know what networking is, and what it could and should be. So we kind of stick with that. But there is a challenge. There is a challenge of what people think of it. And very often it's a negative image.
Yeah. And also to see the value of it I do wish, I was blessed in that I still remember the first conference that I went to on my own. I called myself Patricia No Mates, going out for the coffee at 11 o'clock, and this woman, said hello, and I was like, hello. And that bore a professional network for the years of my career, that we have followed each other's journeys and now are building something really positive in leadership between our two countries, between our universities. And it came from that simple networking piece where she had seen, I suppose, that I was on my own and came and said hello. And then it was like, what do you do and what do you do? And suddenly the connections happened and this fantastic support. And so many students have been supported by that simple conversation, that simple network. That it is about giving back and creating something more. So we could reclaim that language a bit, I think, because something good is happening in it.
I agree with that. And your network's portable. If you build a strong and diverse network, when you move to another company, it moves with you. It's yours. You own it. You possess it. It's a net asset. For your own kind of career. It's about social capital. And I think social capital is going to become increasingly important. I mean, we all understand financial capital and money and possessions and house and car and all that stuff. And we all understand human capital, which is kind of what you know. And both of those are within you. But social capital is between you and other people. And I think it's going to become increasingly important. And what I see the way how companies now, they want to hire and wire. In other words, companies want to hire people who've got networks, and the companies want to wire into those networks for their own benefit. And there's a concept of network intelligence, and this was written a lot about by Reid Hoffman, who founded a company called LinkedIn, which is a pretty amazing technology company. And he said network intelligence is an acceptance that there's more smart people outside your organization than inside your organization. It's just a function of numbers. And your network is the way that you can find out what's going on in your sector, your segment, your geography, your industry, your country, county, whatever it is. It's through your network. And your network will give you those tips and advice and gossip and all that stuff. Because there's two types of information in the world. There's formal information, and you can Google it and you can read reports, but that's available to everybody. And then there's informal information, and that comes from your network. And that can be often gossip and tips and advice and suggestions and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit like a nest, sort of birds build nests with all sorts of bits of twigs and trees and everything. So I think that's where networks can become really, really, really helpful. That you can get one piece of advice can change your life, but doesn't come lying in bed or sitting at your desk,
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I do think you are right that people who are hiring and wiring. They are looking at the network that somebody is bringing, or how they're thinking about their network intelligence.
And I think that can tip the balance in the favor of someone when they're looking for a job, is to bring that with them and to bring that potential with them. That impresses a hiring committee, definitely. I would say I've looked at it myself as I've chaired hiring committees. It's really important.
To get back to my point about marginal gains, this is this game of inches. There's a lot of very smart people out there going for these jobs. So you need to find every competitive advantage you can get. And here's one that everybody can build this competitive advantage and use it to your benefit. And, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah. There's so much I've written a load of notes as I've spoken to you. Excuse me, my voice is giving me trouble today, but and it was the same the last time when I listened to you. I was mesmerised. I was sitting in the front row looking up and just saying, I wish I had this conversation so much earlier. So, Kingsley, I'm delighted that you're putting this message out there. And I think the Network Institute, which we've seen on LinkedIn, which I would really encourage people to look at, offers so much. And so, but we'll put some information up.
Yeah, we'll link it all. Yeah.
Yeah, which would be really
and
good.
we actually we codified this. We've recorded about 25 videos and put an online training course together. So people can go on and they have to buy it, but they can do that course, and that's working well with companies where you want to try and embed this learning. So I tend to go in and spend 3 hours with a company and then put them on this course to kind of embed it, because you'll be familiar probably with the Ettinghouse forgetting curve, which says that within a day of any presentation, 50% is forgotten. Within 3 days is sort of like 75%. Within a week, it's 90% is forgotten. And we're all busy. We're under pressure. But if you don't take action, nothing happens, as I said earlier. Yeah. You can't learn to swim by reading a book, or you can't learn to ride a bike by watching a video. You actually have to get out and do this stuff.
You do, and you have to think about it. You have to,
Sure.
There's a slight change in mindset about it that we have spoken about, to open up that part of yourself, that networking part of the brain, really.
Yeah, we say you got to put it front and center of your personal and business lives. And it does mean actually thinking about it, as you say, just really being self-analytical and saying, what does this mean for me? How can I become better at it? How important is it for me? How can I learn about this stuff? And how can I pass it on? Which is an important part of it too.
Yeah. So, Kingsley, we ask a few questions as we wrap up our chat, and one of them, which I sometimes I forget them, but one question was a leader who has inspired you, or maybe somebody you could change it a bit and have somebody who networks that inspires you, if you like. But who would you say?
Well, I was lucky enough to have worked for a guy called Tony O'Reilly. I don't know if you guys are probably too young to remember him.
No, I remember Tony O'Reilly.
Anyway, so he was a wonderful rugby player. Played for Ireland when he was 18 years of age. Played for the Lions. Went to South Africa, New Zealand. Set all sorts of records. But he used his network, in this case through rugby, to propel his own career around the world. And I say something about him that I've never heard anybody else say, that he never invested in any country in the world where he hadn't played international rugby. So he used that network. So I don't believe in a lot of people say you got to follow your passion. I'm not sure about that. I think you should follow what you're good at, but use your passion. So I certainly, and I was a very poor rugby player, but I certainly used, and I played a bit, and I used it everywhere I went around the world. In fact, I went to Australia and I didn't know anybody, as I said earlier. And I rang, my mum had a friend's kid in Sydney. I rang him and said, can you introduce me to the local Irish business network? And he said, there isn't one. And I said, well, why don't we get a few people together? And we got 13 people at dinner one night, and we launched the Lansdowne Road Club because we were rugby players. Then we dropped the road because there was all sorts of other, in the spirit of kind of sporting ecumenism. So, but the Lansdowne Club is there today. It's the biggest Irish business network in any city in the world. They had their lunch, St. Patrick's Day lunch there, and there's 2,000 people at it a few weeks ago. So, one of the things I believe in networking is nobody started a large organisation. Everything starts at zero. 21-year-old son of a Syrian migrant in Cupertino, in a garage made the first Apple computer, you know. And there's heaps of stories. I mean, Ryanair set off from Waterford with one plane in 1985 and 17 passengers, and look where they are. So I think looking at it like that and gives you, you know, an impetus to go forward on these sorts of things. So yeah, Tony O'Reilly to me was the consummate networker, superb speaker, wonderful, charismatic individual. So he left a big mark on me.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah. And then the next one, Kingsley, is looking back on your own journey. Is there anything that you would do differently?
Looking back at my own, is there anything I would do differently? So I hadn't thought about these too much. So I think if there's anything, I wish I'd played a musical instrument and learned to play a musical instrument. I had two great things I really wished I'd done. One was to learn languages, and I've made quite a lot of effort to do that, and I've gone to live in France and places like that. So I'm a big believer in that. I do a lot of work overseas too. I was in Bosnia and Serbia and Georgia after Christmas doing workshops with government people there, and they all spoke perfect English. I mean, it was so impressive. And I just think that we're really deficient in that area. So I worked on that, but I never worked because I never had an ability. I'd love to have been able to play the piano, but that's I know that's not particularly a career thing, but it is something I regret.
Yeah. You know, I think a portable instrument as well, there's an awful lot to be said, because I played piano growing up, but like I know from when I've been abroad, like I've met people, you know, I worked in a summer camp, and say for example someone had a tin whistle and they played the tin whistle, they were able to throw that into the suitcase, bring it with them wherever, and you know, have the bit of crack then, like sitting around in the evening or whatever it was, you know what I mean, something like that as well. It's fantastic because it's something that you can bring with you. Not that I always like the piano, no, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I think I would say one thing. I think it's helpful particularly if you're overseas and you're traveling around, is to have a party piece. And if you have a tin whistle and you can whip it out, it's fantastic. I mean, it's just wonderful. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't do that, and I can't sing at all. But I did do one thing. I learnt a poem by heart, and it's about 60, 70 lines. And, you know, when the spirit moves me or when I'm under pressure, I can say, well, I know a poem. And of course, not many people know 60 lines of a poem. So immediately people say, oh yeah, give us a poem. And it's actually it's a harmless enough poem. But I find that just having something like that, it gets you out of a corner, you tick the box, you move on, and people remember it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're a man after my own heart, Kingsley, because I'm the poem girl too, and my poem is The Listeners by Walter Delamere, nice and scary. But I have it to, you know, and learned it from my grandmother, who used to recite it to us as we were going to sleep, which is slightly gothic and macabre, but she used to.
Yeah,
and it's still there with us now, you know. But you have it, and it's something. Yeah. But I don't do it very often. But it's there if it's needed.
Good to know. Good to have it in the bag. Yeah.
In the repertoire. Yeah. Yeah. And if we were to ask you, what piece of advice would you give to somebody starting out on their career?
Yeah, look, I mean, speak to everybody. I mean, just, you never know who somebody knows. So, I mean, I speak to everybody. I mean, I'm very friendly with my postman, whose name is Andy. And do you know how I know his name is Andy? Well, the answer is because I asked him. I said, what's your name? And he said, my name's Andy. And he said, and your name's Kingsley. And I said, how did you know that? And he said, I deliver your mail every day.
Brilliant. Lovely.
So Andy and I, we have a good bit of a chat most mornings when he's passing, and it's good crack. I'm not looking for anything. We enjoy each other. And I just think, you know, we tend, I think all societies in the kind of world, we tend to become more and more kind of secluded from people around us, from neighbours and etc. So, you know, I always make a bit of an effort to chat to, I thank bus drivers. I like to talk to the barista and all that kind of stuff. So I think all that's sort of simple sort of stuff. The one thing when I was thinking of is maybe to tell people at the beginning when they're setting out on the journey, as you say, somebody that I became a fan of, who wrote at the other end of the journey when people are about to die. And this woman is called Bronnie Ware. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, an Australian, maybe New Zealand, palliative care nurse who looked after people during the last 12 months of their life and looked after thousands. And she wrote a book called, it's the top 5 regrets of the dying. She said all people said the same thing to her. So I think, you know, when you're starting out, it might be worth thinking with it's a bit macabre, I know, with the end in mind. And what she said is, people said, I wish I'd spent more time and stayed in touch with my friends. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
She said, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I had kept work in its kind of right place rather than just completely working like crazy. She said the people told her they wish they had lived the life that they wanted to lead, not the life that other people wanted them to lead. And she said, they said, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. And the fifth and final one was, I wish I'd allowed myself to be happier. So they're all kind of, they make you think a bit. And maybe starting out with with the end in mind, you just there might be some lessons there for people.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
very
really
powerful.
profound. Yeah, it's very powerful. It's really profound when you think about it. And as important today with the way that work is taking over our time and the changing nature of how we're thinking about work.
Totally,
I think probably good to start out with those in mind. They would be important in a good induction handbook for any organisation, as well as for life, I think. I really like it.
Look, I don't say them too often because they sound as if a little bit of a downer, but they're meant in the most positive way, and they're meant as good takeaways.
Yeah. So,
Kingsley, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
You can see why I wanted to chat to Kingsley.
Absolutely,
I think it was just, I was mesmerised when I heard you speak. And today
Great.
again, the same.
Super.
I'm jotting away.
Yeah.
So there's just so much learning from you, and you're very generous in how you give that out to people. So
spread it around. Send the elevator back down, and you never know what might happen. I mean, I'd love to get students in universities throughout Ireland, throughout the world, making this a module. Even if you're doing medicine or engineering or computer science, I think this is an important part of who we are as people, but it tends to get ignored.
Yeah, and I think we could start also early too. There are places in school in transition year, and because when those students are going out to placements, just a little module around developing that muscle, that little bit of skill.
Yeah,
there's lots of potential here, Kingsley. I think I would like to continue the conversation.
Well, I did a piece online there. I put stuff up online about the importance for youngsters to try and build some diversity into their network and not hang around people just like them. And I got a school in Dublin call me and said, that was really interesting. Could you come and do it for our final year boys' school? And I said, happy to do it. And I did it with them. And then they said something very interesting. They said, could you come in the next night and do it for their parents? And 320 parents showed up the next night. And there was that's really 160, boys, they're all couples. But they showed up for this, and it was a fantastic opportunity, and they really bought into this whole thing. So I thought that's an indicator.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
It's absolutely brilliant. More of that is needed, most certainly. So hopefully we'll continue to talk after this
guys.
over the next few weeks.
Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you.
Absolutely
so much,
brilliant.
Kingsley.
Thank you. That's great.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks a million.